The Ways and Means. It is still January 28th. We are still the Ways and Means Committee. It is 1:15, and we are hearing our first testimony about the FY27 proposed budget from Adam Gresham and Rebecca Samaroff. Floor is yours.
Thank you.
Rebecca's right behind you with her camera.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hello there, Commissioner.
All right, I'm trying to share here. Oh, I see. Oh, look at that. Adam Gresham, Commissioner of Finance and Management. I'd like to start off with just a very quick overview of how we found the revenues for our budget. Since this is the Revenue Committee, I figured you guys might be interested.
We love that. Thank you.
So if you look up top, you'll note we break the general fund into sources and uses, the sources of the revenue. So this is the page that we always show that shows the revenue that we're relying upon for putting forward our budget. And this is a pretty simple page. If you remember last year, there were a number of governor's revenue initiatives that subtracted from the top line. I think there was an EITC boost, maybe Social Security. I don't remember all of them. But on this one, there are no revenue initiatives. So really what you're looking at are the vast majority of our revenues, which is always the case, is the e-board variance. That top number of 2.533 billion. I would note, and keep in mind, this was downgraded about $8.5 million for fiscal 27 by the e-board in January. That is a little bit, and that is worth noting. But I think more importantly, this top line number of 2.533 was 2.403 last year. So it's $130 million higher. So the revenue downgrade was from a higher level. It wasn't an absolute downgrade over the year before. So we're still dealing with about $130 million more revenue than when I sat in this chair last year and spoke to you guys. So overall, what I would say from a budgeting standpoint is our revenues have allowed us to do what we do. The next line down is the property transfer tax. And that comes from the property transfer tax that buyers pay when they purchase a property. The half of that amount goes to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. Roughly a little over a third goes to the general fund, and a little less than a third goes to the Municipal and Regional Planning Commission. There's a small amount that goes to the Property Valuation Review to administer the current use program, use value appraisal, as well as a small amount that goes to ADS for the geographic information systems. But the additional property transfer tax here comes from two sources. The first source is, you'll remember that when we issued a housing bond 6 or 7 years ago, the payments for that bond, $2.5 million, were going to come from the property transfer tax. 1.5 million of that actually was taken off the top from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board allocation. Another million approximately was from a surcharge on clean water. So that's $2.5 million of that three. The remaining roughly $600,000 is actually from our friends at Tax, who, when they administer the use value appraisal program, require roughly in this budget, a little over $600,000. But statute sends them 1.5% of the overall property transfer tax, which is over $80 million. That amounts to roughly, I think, 1.3 million or so. They don't need that amount. So they submit to us a budget about what they need for administering the use value appraisal program. And the remainder, which this year amounts to about $600,000, we just sweep it to the general fund. So that's how the $3 million come from. $2.5 million is to service a housing bond and the remainder
I
is.
don't understand why that's separate from the e-board forecast.
The e-board forecasts what comes in total for property transfer tax. That's all. What we do with that transfer tax is up to statute or up to session law.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where you have official e-board forecasts, that is not the sum total of all the revenue coming to the state because you've separated out this $3 million.
That's the current law total of what goes. What's part of that forecast is the 37% of the property transfer tax that goes to the general fund. That's in that forecast.
Okay.
So the remainder of the property transfer tax that goes to BHCB.
It goes to all these-
are.
Okay.
So the reason that 3 million is there is it's not current law. It's not hardwired into current law. It's a budgetary maneuver that we.
In the little bit that I've gathered about this year's budget, it seems like there's a lot of moving things from sort of their usual special funds into new places. And I think the ways we account for that are an interesting part of what I'm looking forward to your rhetoric on the matter.
We are about to head right into that.
Okay, it seems like we've started.
So the remainder on this page, the direct apps are pretty standard. We take some money from the human services, additional federal receipts that they're not using. The cash register, otherwise known as Department of Financial Regulation, that comes from their various funds. Attorney General, typically they send us $2 million or so from their total settlement money. Liquor, unclaimed property, sports wagering, I think you're familiar with that here. And these are estimates. And you'll see during budget adjustment, 9 times out of 10, at least one of the financial regulation, liquor, unclaimed property, sports wagering, those will change. Hopefully for the better, sometimes for the worse. Sometimes we overestimate what our receipts will be, other times we underestimate. In the past few years, we've more underestimated than overestimated.
Now, liquor control, for instance, is the net revenue from 802 Spirits or whatever it's, right?
Otherwise called property.
Yeah.
It's an enterprise fund, so yeah, it's the net. So we add that in to our e-board revenue and property transfer tax, and our total base sources come to 2.644. There are 2 other things to mention. One, when we received the emergency board $8.5 million downgrade, that came on a Thursday, and we were submitting the budget the following Tuesday. And there was a 3-day weekend in between. So we scrambled to fill that hole, and we did that with additional reversions. We revert money from existing appropriations every year. Money that's either not needed, an appropriation that was too high for the cause that it was trying to accomplish, or whatever reason. So
I'm gonna jump in for 1 second.
Yeah.
So there has been a rhetoric that's been spreading about this e-board downgrade. And I just want to remind everyone, and we heard this from the economists, that this is actually the closest they think they've ever gotten in any of their memory to what their projection was. So it might be rounding slightly down, but it is, I think calling it a downgrade is a bit of a misnomer.
as you please.
I will really try to let you finish that.
At the end of the day, though, we were $8.5 million in the hole because they changed their forecast. So the reversions are simply our way of helping to fill that hole. The next line down, there will be, I suspect, a fair focus this year. We are in last year's budget. There was additional money that was evident was available towards the end of the budget season. So the House and Senate appropriators created what they call contingent appropriations, meaning if that money is actually there, those appropriations will be met. One of those contingent appropriations was a $30 million temporary reserve to be used for federal backfill, in case we lose federal money, property tax relief, emergency housing, or any other function for the good of the state of Vermont. We are unreserving that reserve, because you have to unreserve a reserve to use it. And we are carrying it forward into fiscal 27, and we are going to be sending that and the balance after the budget adjustment of $74.9 million to the education fund to provide property tax relief. So because we're unreserving $30 million reserve and we're carrying forward from the BAA in 26 into 27, $74.9 million, those are additional one-time revenue available to us to spend. And those monies will be packaged together with a bow and sent to the education fund for property tax relief, which is a total of $104.9 million. Later on in this presentation, you will hear of another $10 million regarding the purchase and use tax that will be added to that 104.9. So those are all of our sources. And at the end of the day, I had $2.759 billion to deploy in the budget.
Can I just ask, because we haven't spent a whole lot of time on the BAA, where does the 74.9 million in the BAA come from?
So the lion's share of that came actually from the July Emergency Board fiscal 26 forecast. You'll remember that in July, the economists got together and determined that the forecast that they laid out for fiscal 26 was shy about 75 to 80, I think it was $77 million. And so they upgraded the revenue forecast that amount of money. So immediately we had another, I think it was $77 million to spend. So that's where most of that comes from. Now, if I want to switch to another, how do I unshare?
Like a button that's brightly colored at the bottom or the top.
Up here. Let's see it.
Stop share.
Oh, the red one. And I will share another screen.
You usually use Teams. So you're switching platforms here. It's so fun.
There we go. So here's the budget language that I'd like to share with you guys. And our language document, actually this year, our language document was shockingly short. It was 34 pages. Last year, I think it was almost twice that. Partly because we don't have as many one-time appropriations, which is partly due to the fact that we don't have as much spare cash to spend.
But just a font size.
No. Just saying. Anyway, so what I did was, what I've typically done is I took out from our budget the components that I think pertain to this committee. The House Appropriations Committee may send you other stuff, but I suspect this is what you will receive. I've already addressed the property transfer tax, but what I wanted to say is in past years, we have not withstood this language and we have directed more to the general fund, typically out of the allotment that goes to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. Last year, we did not do that. This year, again, we are not doing this. So they'll get their statutory allotment, which this year is about 37.5.
Where are you taking it from then?
Where are we taking the extra property transfer tax from? Or? Well, 37% goes to the general fund anyway. And then the additional $2.5 million in session law, actually, if you read through this language, you'll see of that comes as redirected into the general funding. And then we notwithstand the component that directs 1.5% to property valuation and review, and we set them a specific budget of $608,000, I think it was. Actually, Rebecca, you may know better than I what the PV&R budget is, but we direct whatever is over and above that into the general fund. So that's where that extra $3 million.
So from where the money was going last year to where the money is going this year.
Identical.
The only change is that you're not sending it to PBR anymore.
No, we did the same thing last year. We've done the same thing every year. The big change over, say, 2 and 3 years ago is we're not reducing the VHCB budget. We're giving them their statutory allotment. So the other thing I would point out here, which we also did last year, which is not a change, but I think it's outside of the statutory allocations. I think it's 13% of the, or 17, I think it's 13% of the property transfer tax goes to the municipal and regional planning commissions. ACCD contacted us and said the allotment, normally I think 70% of that goes to the regional planning commissions, 20% goes to the municipal planning commissions. They said they'd like to change that percentage because evidently they're doing it based on need. And so the amount that we're supposed to send to both of those organizations, the top line amount is the same. We haven't changed that. We're giving them, I think, 13%, but how we're divvying it up between the municipalities and the regionalities, if that's a word, is different than what we're told to do. That's the only other worthy comment from the property transfer tax.
And folks, we will spend time on this language, turning it into a table so that it is more digestible than a combination of Adam's words and the words on the screen. Would that be
If I were
great?
If I were better at getting screens on Zoom, I could actually have a table on my.
Oh, we don't mind if you like show us all the stuff off your computer screen while you're finding it.
I'll send it to you.
Hey.
So the next thing I think worth of pointing out, I'm going to yield to my colleague from tax. You see in our transfer section, in every budget, we're transferring money here and there. And from the general fund, you'll see there are actually 2 transfers, the Tax Computer System Modernization Fund, one from the general fund and one from the education fund. And I think Becca is better able to speak to that than.
Sure. Yeah. And I can give a high level overview of this and would just encourage the committee to hear from Andrew Stein, our Chief Operating Officer, if you want more of a refresher on the details of this annual transfer to the Computer Modernization Fund. But high level, this is a statutory transfer, section 3209 of 32 VSA. And it states that the CMF shall receive an annual transfer from the general fund and education fund in amounts not to exceed 0.21% of total revenue collected in the prior fiscal year by the department. We've never asked for a full 0.21% of total revenue collected, and instead use a methodology that estimates need based on 0.21% of a limited number of revenue sources within those funds. That methodology has been reviewed by JFO numerous times and is calculated by our fiscal analysts at the department, and then reviewed with finance and management. For the FY27 budget, the proposed annual budget for the Computer Modernization Fund is $6.397 million. This is the appropriation authority to make expenditures from the fund. The amount that I should have mentioned, the amount that we will or request to be transferred into the fund is only $6.2 million. A little mismatch there. And that about I'd say 70% of that, 71% of that will go to our major contractor who handles our integrated tax system, Fast Enterprises, that supports our integrated tax system that lets us do all we do. And also supporting that system and also supporting an upcoming upgrade or a version update to that system. We have other smaller amounts that go to other vendors like Chambridge that host the model that the Joint Fiscal Office and tax team share for doing our income tax modeling. Catalyst, the BT Pi property software, our scanning contractor. It's been great. And just other potential IT expenses related to servers and other miscellaneous vendors. that's kind of the high level overview. I may be able to take some questions, but Andrew's really the master of CMF.
And I know that the appropriations committee sent out sort of testimony guidance related to budget testimony in early December. And so when we have Andrew in, maybe next week or so, we would love to sort of use that format for our conversation.
That'd be great.
Thanks.
Right in between the general fund transfer and the ed fund transfer to the tax computer modernization fund is the education fund transfer. You saw up above in our sources that we are taking 74.9 million that we're carrying forward from the budget adjustment and 30 million that we're unreserving and carrying forward from 26 to 27. We are transferring those to the education fund, which is a total of 104.9. However, the total transfer to the ed fund is $10 million more than that. And that gets to the change that you'll see later on in the budget to the purchase and use tax. So we are filling the hole that in the ed fund from removing $10 million of purchase and use receipts from the ed fund and leaving it in the transportation fund. So the total ed fund transfer is just under $150 million.
You're welcome to answer this question now or when you get to the T fund part, but why do you have them separate? I understand like that the philosophical reasoning behind it is different, but the budget's not usually like full of philosophical reasoning.
So what do we
It's
have?
like it's a general fund transfer to the ed fund to fill a hole. In both cases, why do you have them separate in here?
Why do we have, I'm sorry, why do we have what separate? Why is there a separate fund for the ed, for education, transportation and general fund or?
No, why do you have the transfer from the general fund to the ed fund? I think you just said that the transfer for the purposes of backfilling purchase and use
Yeah.
was in a different part of the budget language.
Yeah.
Than here, and that's my question, it's a transfer from one fund to another of a sum, why do you have it in two separate places? Other than philosophical,
No, it's from a technical standpoint, the language or the explanation of what we do is in one section. The actual movement of money is in the other. The D section always has transfers to and from the general fund or any fund. The E section has all the explanations of what actually is going on. That's why you see them separately.
and so this is the full transfer, including both.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So, and again, we'll get to purchase and use actually right towards the end, but I just wanted you to see the total transfer amount. So moving into the E section, you'll see a number of things. The first is one of the revenue statutes directs any estate tax revenue over 125% of the e-board forecast into the higher education endowment trust. That's been the practice for a number of years. I don't know when that was initiated, but that has been the practice. I might say for most years, that's been kind of a nothing burger. But in some years, typically when estate taxes when there are a lot of estate taxes, that becomes a factor. Last year was one of those years when there was about $25 to $30 million additional estate tax paid in above the forecast. So that amount is generally, and was last year, directed to the Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund. You will see in this document, we are asking to change that and direct that additional estate tax revenue to a new fund called the School Construction. Right.
The fund that we created.
So what we would like to do is, instead of sending it to the Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund, send it to the School Construction Fund, School Aid and Construction Fund. And this is the first of 2 or 3 statutory changes that you'll see that do that.
Can I just ask a question? Could you just say a word about what the Education Endowment Trust Fund does? What that money is usually used for?
So that is overseen by the state treasurer. And he actually would be a good person to come in and speak about it. But they are a trust.
We're taking more, just for the committee, we're taking more testimony about the estate tax tomorrow. Commerce and Education are taking testimony about the trust fund tomorrow. And it's helpful to hear your thinking on this, Adam. So please go ahead.
So they receive, they have 3 sources of revenue. One is anything that the General Assembly and the governor in their wisdom and generosity choose to appropriate or transfer to it. 2 is private contributions, which is somewhat unusual. We generally don't have funds to take private, but they do. And then the 3rd is excess estate tax receipts from 25. So that's their sources. Their mission is to help offset the cost of higher ed for students. So up to 5% of their total assets at any one year can be distributed to 3 recipients: the Vermont State University, the University of Vermont, and VSAC. Doesn't have to be 5%, but up to 5% can be distributed. So I think, and those monies are used, I believe, to offset the cost of going to college for students. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, the state treasurer, I think, has quite a bit more articulate sayings on this.
So this language is not from the treasurer's office.
And no, it is not. So you will see in this a number, let's see, of instances. So there you see the school construction aid special fund. And there you see we've added a line that essentially what we did was took it from what was formerly the Vermont Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund. We simply beamed this line that we're taking out. We beamed it up to the school construction aid special fund.
That technical term. Do you anticipate this is going to be enough to capitalize the fund, to pay debt payments on construction? What's your expectation on how these revenues can be used and how stable they'll be into the future?
In terms of enough to capitalize, honestly, there are some years when we don't even get enough estate tax to hit forecast.
Huh.
So I don't know is the answer, but it's a start. And, the governor was clear that he's not thinking this is the answer to school construction. I think we're all aware that we're going to need quite a bit more than we're going to get from the estate tax in excess. But it's another arrow in the quiver, is probably the best way to put it. But again, if you look back, and I think actually tax has and joint fiscal also have, and Rebecca, you may be aware, I think we've looked back at the estate tax overage over the years. And it's pretty lumpy. Some years we're in the money, other years not. So I don't know, Rebecca, do you have any?
I didn't prepare that history for this testimony, but we could certainly grab it. I think lumpy is a great term to describe how often we hit that 125% mark.
We're taking some testimony on that tomorrow. And so you're taking the money that's intended for low-income Vermont kids to pay for higher ed and moving it into the school construction fund.
I don't know what the demographic is, honestly. I don't know what the demographic is for the children who use this. For the people who use it. I don't know what the demographic is.
Oh,
So low income, I don't.
I don't want to take testimony from the treasurer about an idea that wasn't theirs. Who's the best person to take more testimony about this idea from?
This came from the administration.
So are you the best person to
So-
come in for that testimony?
It's in the budget. And I can see that I think the treasurer would be able to answer the question of what is a higher education endowment trust fund. I wouldn't trust my words on that, but this was a proposal from the administration.
The administration is a broad, I'm not trying to be difficult here. There are a lot of people in the administration, Adam. So if we want to take more testimony on this idea, are you the person who should come back in, or is it someone else?
No, I I would invite you to welcome back in the Agency of Education.
Okay.
Probably would be, because they are the most knowledgeable, I assume, about school construction.
Yes, they had a-
Cost of.
He had a report about it just.
So I would defer to them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Representative Wozniak.
How much money are we talking about this transfer?
Like I said, it's pretty lumpy. Some years, I think last year, it was somewhere between 25 and $30 million in excess of the 125% of the board forecast. So call it 25 to 30 million. In other years, there's been a few million. I would say in 50% of the years, there's been 0. So, and again, I mean, I've seen a chart, again, tax may have it or the joint fiscal office may have it, but it's not what I would call a reliable source, but it is one source.
And so would this be a in perpetuity change
That's what
as written?
that's what our proposal does. There's no end date.
So Adam, I understand that, and you said the governor admitted that this was not necessarily enough money to solve the need for school construction. Are you privy to or thinking about what may be that funding source in the future? It's not relevant to this budget, but.
We've had a lot of discussions on that. I'm not ready to share discussions because the thinking isn't fully baked.
When might you be ready to share the discussion?
When
Lots rests on those decisions.
decisions are made.
Some decisions can't be made until those decisions are made.
Understood.
Well, thanks.
Welcome. So,
Was there something else out of that trust fund that was also in the budget?
yes, but not there's, see, I don't know if I highlighted that, because I didn't think it was for this committee, but, there is a one-time transfer from the Higher Education Endowment Fund to the University of Vermont for a stadium is the best way to put it.
Stadium.
I believe a sports complex that was,
AstroTurf or natural grass or?
I believe it's an indoor facility for various athletic events. The University of Vermont has put in, I'm going to say about $70 million. They have donors lined up who are waiting for the state to put some skin in the game. So there is a $15 million one-time transfer from the Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund to UVM for a contribution to the sports complex that was, well, I think it would be a good idea to have the University of Vermont in there. If this is the committee of jurisdiction for that, I'm sure they'd be very happy to come in here and explain.
And from the administration, would want to explain it other than?
I think the proponent would probably be Jason Malucci, would probably be the best person to talk to.
Thank you. And if we're going to be looking at the estate tax, sort of anywhere that the estate tax is anticipated to go would be an important part of that conversation. That's why I'm bringing it up here. Thank you.
So moving on down, the next item that I believe will cross this committee's jurisdiction, you may be more familiar with or not, but one appropriation within our general fund is last year was $3.41 million for reappraisal and listing payments. You guys are probably aware that the state helps offset the cost of a number of functions that towns do.
We just heard testimony about it this morning. For you.
Are you ready to move on? I mean, you understand what we're doing and
I have questions about it coming out of the pilot fund. I don't understand the thinking there.
you don't, I'm sorry?
the use of the pilot fund for it.
So one thought there, actually, the thought that probably carried the day is the pilot fund is paid for by municipalities. Those that choose a local option tax, they keep 75, formerly 70, 75% this year. And the state takes 25%. So that's what fills the pilot. So doesn't it make sense to recycle that money back to the communities who are actually paying it in? There would be some minor redistribution since not every community has a local option tax. Although at this point, virtually every community where you can buy anything does, but the local option taxes are paid by communities. So this would be recycling back to the communities.
But I think there's sort of an interesting thing that most communities that like need the litigation assistance are the smaller towns that actually don't bring in that much money on the pilot. But we haven't looked, like, I think it's worth us looking at that analysis if that's the argument you're making, Representative Burkhardt.
Yeah, my question is just, could you remind us what that 25% is already being used for by this date? So what is that 25% going to now? If we're choosing to use it for a different purpose.
Well, the lion's share of that 25% would still be used for the same purpose that it always is. But the issue has become the pilot fund has grown and the pilot payments back to the communities don't dry up the fund. Remember, it used to be back in the day, we didn't even pay 100% of what the pilot payments.
We really just started.
We used to pay about 90% and 95%. And then the fund assets grew to the point where we now pay 100% and we still have a growing balance. So, and it, you know, CAPS actually, Rebecca can speak to this better than I, they've done a fair amount of analysis on this and they're convinced that this could be, you know, have no impact on the balance of the fund. So.
Except that I know there's an allocation for the BAA to take money out of the pilot fund. And then we also have the municipal grantless stabilization program, which stood up last year, which could go out 10 years. I'm really concerned about just the viability of that fund if we start taking other things from it.
Well, the BAA appropriation, you can turn to your right there and ask him about that. That was not our suggestion. But to the extent that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, we're very pleased with that. But I mean, not to be flip, I mean, I do think that there was, I mean, we did a fair amount of work on this. You know, this wasn't something that we thought would just be a great idea and we put it forward. Actually, you know, Rebecca and her team have done a fair amount of work on it. And I know that your joint fiscal office is on the same. So, I don't know.
I know that there's lots of stakeholders that you talk to in advance of putting the budget forward publicly. Have you had any conversations with the League of Cities and Towns about this?
Personally, I have not. Rebecca, have you guys?
No, we have not either.
Okay. We will make sure to have them in. They had particular proposals for the pilot funds last year that we did not entirely fulfill, that I imagine are going to re-merge this year.
So one of the issues, maybe the hardest issue of all for this is, it's surprising to me that, you know, a $3.41 million appropriation has so many statutory citations. So you have the $8.50 per parcel appraisal or reappraisal amount, that is in statute. You have the $1 equalization study per parcel fee paid to towns, that's in statute. You have the $100,000 Lister education, that is in statute. And you have the $70,000 hydroelectric plant litigation assistance, that is in statute. So that's why I'm going to thumb down about, I don't know, 2 or 3 pages to get past all of the various changes that we had to make to statute to get to our next. Next on the list that I think will come to this committee, I believe you've already spoken with Nolan on the health IT fund. So I don't think I need to be, expand on that, but
Well, I'm curious, 1 year is like, must we? That's like, I mean, do you have like grand plans for next year that you're just not ready for yet? And then 1 year makes sense, but like otherwise 1 year just seems like a wild amount of extra words we'll have to use.
so Madam Chair, I think
I understand the
think-
desire to not have it, but
I think we want to make sure that we study this issue. We feel like 2 years is too long. This essentially is what we're saying to you is we're going to look at this and we're going to come back to you with a recommendation about whether we just eliminate, or, we propose eliminating the sunset entirely, or we actually sunset. Both of those are on the table. There's been some intersection between the Rural Health Transformation Program and electronic medical records and the like. So I think part of it is that because of this new Rural Health Transformation Plan and the likelihood or potential for intersection, we thought, let's just push it out a year. But, really, I think part of it is we're just trying to hold our own feet to the fire here and say, we got to come back to you guys with something. Either we want this fund, we're in love with it, or we're not. So that's somewhat inarticulate way of saying we thought 2 years was too long. 1 year might be not long enough, but better than two.
so one thing I would offer is that if it's the sunset's out 5 years and you have an idea next year, that doesn't foreclose changing things next year just because the sunset's out 5 years. And so I guess I would just sort of,
Get it?
consider like, would the governor veto the budget over this sunset provision being pushed out a little bit further? You don't have to answer that now, Adam.
Anyway, and there's two things really. There's the health IT fund, and then there's the revenue source, as you guys are aware, the healthcare claims tax that feeds that. I think it's 0.199 of 1%, if memory serves. So both of those needed to be, I don't think the claims tax was abolished, but I think the component of the claims tax that goes into the health IT fund was sunset. So we changed that sunset. And here you see in E516, that's the change to the purchasing needs. And we ratcheted it down roughly 10 million a year. And then in E516.1, we simply make clear in statute that no motor vehicle purchase and use tax will be used in the education fund, and it will all be used in the transportation fund.
I understand the strong desire to strengthen the transportation fund right now and share that goal 100%. Even in my really endless commute through the snow yesterday, I had these like little panics about like not having any plow trucks on the highway anymore instead of just like one lane plowed. And this is, at this point, the proposal does nothing but raise property taxes because we haven't gotten through transformation. And so if we're transferring general fund, why not just transfer from the general fund to the transportation fund? Why must it be washed by the education fund?
Because I think consistent transfers from one fund to the other are suboptimal practice. Why not just
Transfer twice?
why not just eliminate the reason for the transfer?
You're not doing that here.
We are we're taking the first step in that direction. Yes, we are. And it doesn't raise property taxes this year. That's why there's a transfer.
I mean, if that transfer was applied to property taxes instead of a transfer, it would lower property taxes more. But that's all.
I'm sure I'm following you on that, but the idea being is $10 million less of the purchase and use taxes going to the ed fund. So there's $10 million of general fund being sent over there to replace. They'll never know the difference. Money is green.
So long, I don't know, this, we're only looking at this budget, but long term. Are you counting on savings in the education fund to make up for the loss of the purchase and use tax transfer into the education fund?
This is a component of education transformation. I don't think there's any question that if we don't go forward with transformation, that this would be somewhat troubled, but our intent is to move forward with transformation, and we are expecting savings.
Right, the only reason why I bring that up is if the savings aren't realized, then it's looking at continued reliance on the general fund or income tax or other sources of funds
That's correct.
for education, so. Yeah, clear eyed.
We're acutely aware
Yeah.
that the luxury of having this money, as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about this, I mean, we got an upgrade in July of 2026, pardon me, July of 2025 of $77 million. That instantly goes right to the bottom. That's not going to happen in future years. So we know that our revenue sources going to be strained. The other thing I'll say is, our current services cost this year, just running government exactly the way we ran it last year, was $139 million general fund. So we're going to need $139 million more dollars next year, or counting for inflation, probably $145 million more dollars next year, just to run government. So those kinds of revenue scenarios have you believe that if you're going to transform, you got to get going and start transforming. And so we're very desirous of moving.
So Act 73, regardless of how anyone feels about it, very carefully implemented all of the tax changes in the same year so that it would not cause some of the challenges that this particular change is going to cause. And I'm curious why you did not slot that into that same time frame.
I think we view this separately. I mean, honestly, I think we
Just said you viewed it together. Okay, cool. When we continue to argue about this, do you want to come back each time, or should we ask someone else from the administration to come in
about which topic, Madam Chair?
about the purchase and use?
Purchase and use tax. Rebecca, what do you say? Should, I think,
So
I'm
this is what-
expecting that our revenue department is better than our budget. I'm the guy who spends
It
the
might be
money.
the transportation. I mean, it might be the transportation agency too, right? Most of the transportation fund revenue doesn't go through tax.
Yeah,
That's
this
true.
is, one of the tax types that we don't actually touch, but
So maybe it is not Rebecca's responsibility to testify.
would be happy to argue about this with you too, Emily.
Thanks, Rebecca.
From a policy standpoint, you're welcome to invite me back in.
Okay.
I don't promise you I'll say anything more than I'm saying now, but you're welcome to continue.
Thanks.
I think, much as I really enjoy being here, I think that's all that I have to tell you guys.
I imagine that as we look through the budget, we'll find more sections that we might have some jurisdiction.
There may be.
We'll invite you back for that.
I mean, I made best efforts to figure out what you guys are going to receive. There may be other stuff in there.
Thank you. And Ways and Means is always your home, Adam.
I just feel it all here.
This in the old days. Never.
It's all right. Didn't count. Oh,
Grass is always greener.
And Rebecca, we will schedule a separate time for you. It'll go through your department budget ask as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry.
Bye, Chris. We're gonna take a deep breath and shift gears. In that gear shifting, we are going to move to the tax classifications work and implementation of that. Kirby drafted some language that really. We're gonna take a brief break and gather, we're not going to? Okay, great. We're not gonna take a brief break and gather ourselves. That essentially like takes the report from tax, turns it into a bill and adds the decision points in as decision points. This might be a framework of working through something that we'll use a few times this year. So I'm also curious for people's feedback on like how this works. Usually we like have a bill or we don't have a bill. And this is like a bill with like great big questions just sit in the middle of it in slightly different font. So, and I like, it feels helpful to me as a way of thinking about it, but anyway, I'm curious from other people. Kirby, do you want to join us? And so we like are gonna have this language, we're gonna have the RAD language, maybe pre-K, and those things might all wind up, like all those separate pieces of language might come together into one bill once we work through it, but we'll work through them separately for a little while. I think everyone knows that part of the usual go round.
Questioning font, Comic Sans, or using a fun font?
I don't know.
No.
It's just highlighted. Sorry.
I think only Grady at JFO uses stands for comic relief.
Approve that.
The Kirby Keaton Legislative Council, not a person who has knowingly used Comic Sans as an adult.
No.
That's
correct.
And as the chair said, we have some language to look at. Before we go in, I want to preface what we're looking at, which is based off of the tax department's report on classifications that it was required to submit December 15th under Act 73. That report has 8 steps for implementation between now and 2028, when Act 73 says that this is to go online. So for the next calendar year, steps 1 and 2 from that report are covered in the next calendar year. So we have language for step 1 that I will be flagging as all along the way involves policy decisions for all of you. I've tried to prepare good placeholder language for you to look at for things, but I will be reiterating all along the way that it's placeholder language that's based off of mostly recommendations from the department, but for things for you to make decisions about. And then for step 2, I did not draft it as placeholder language. Instead, those things tend to be bigger questions about how you want to go about something. So those are just phrased as policy questions separately. And so with that, we can get into what I have here, which is taking the classifications language from Act 73 and modifying it. Another preface comment I'll make in general, when Beth and John and I go about drafting Act 73 stuff, unless we're asked to do it differently, the default for drafting this tends to be, we're going to assume a repeal and replace because it just seems the cleanest drafting wise for us to line things up. It doesn't have to necessarily be that way, but that's what we're doing. So you can envision this as we are pretending like we are going to take out the language from Act 73 and we're going to replace it with this other more detailed version of a roadmap for classifications. Okay, I'm going to skip step 1 because we're going to visit that at the end because that's a tax department step 2 item. So we'll go into section 2 of the bill. Which is the grand list contents statute. It is repeated here because it's in Act 73 as part of setting up classifications. There's no change except for one, which is that I have removed the VCGI contiguous parcel language for our purposes for this project we're doing, because it's not needed for classifications. It's not actually related to classifications. It was in there in Act 73. You heard testimony this morning that the department's interested in, so in VCGI, they said was also interested in changing how to go about that issue. So we're just gonna, since that is really not related to what we're talking about, it's gone from here for now. And that's it for that section. Section 3 gets into the framework from Act 73 on establishing a classifications system. And the changes from the X 73 language start in subsection C of section 3 on page 3. And I'm going to skip to the definition for non-homestead residential, which is a lot of these other definitions play off of that. So I think that's kind of our anchor point. So we'll start with that. The definition we have for non-homestead residential, and in other words, this is the definition of the second homes and short-term rental properties that are intended to receive potentially different tax treatment, right? So that's what non-homestead residential is. It means a parcel or portion of a parcel with a dwelling, that is new, with a dwelling, that is not a homestead, not rented out as a long-term rental, not a mobile home, or used exclusively by the owner of the homestead on the same parcel for domestic purposes as part of the homestead. I'm going to walk through what all of this means and unpack everything. Yeah. It means that when the department will be working with assessing officials to determine for each property, and they'll be using forms and stuff that we'll go into as well. When they're going to make this decision for a property or a unit within a property, if it's declared as a homestead, if it qualifies as a homestead, it's not going to be taxed as non-homestead residential. If it's rented out as a long-term rental, which we have definitions for, which we'll get into in a minute, not going to be treated as, that unit is not going to be treated as non-homestead residential. If it's a mobile home, the department's suggestion through its report was, what do we do about mobile homes? So this placeholder language is, one thing to do about mobile homes is to say, never tax them as second homes. So if they're a homestead, they'd be a homestead, which is how it would be anyway. But if they're not someone's homestead, the mobile home would go under non-homestead, non-residential, like the treatment would be under current law.
I have a small thing, which is I've just been talking to a lot of folks who've been working on manufactured home legislation, and I know they're trying to shift to that terminology. Does that create a problem if we switch to that terminology in this language, or is there a definition someplace else of manufactured home that gets mixed up?
Yeah, I had to decide which to put here, and I put mobile home because there are definitions around it now. If the change you're talking about takes place, all references to mobile homes, including this one, would be in that process changed over to that other terminology. So I'm sticking with what the statutes have now, but yeah, I'm aware that there's talk of changing that.
And we'll probably take testimony on that later.
And there's a question here about, I did not define mobile home. I can define it by reference to one of the definitions that exists. Didn't think that was going to be a huge problem for administration for tax. So, and by not defining it by reference, it leaves them a little room to make some, to use their own deference a little bit. So that's kind of why it is, but that's another policy question as part of this. If you want a specific definition by reference, that's another thing. Obviously the policy question is whether you're okay with this default treatment for these types of properties to never be considered non-homestead residential. When we get into the definition of dwelling, I'll skip ahead on that since it's related. Through a different mechanism, we are also leaving out seasonal properties. Those would also not be under the language before you, and we'll get to that language in a minute, but I think it's kind of a similar reasoning. Those are also being excluded, but they're being excluded under the definition of dwelling. So moving on, the last part here.
You just say that one, but this is this is the source of most of my email. So I just want to say it loud and proud for the record that we're going to get to it. But so seasonal dwellings, camps are excluded from this, but we're going to get to that language in a little bit.
Under the language you're looking at, it's placeholder. It's a recommendation from the department, but yes, this language excludes seasonal properties. It doesn't use the term seasonal Well, let's just jump to it. We're talking about it. Let's just do it. If it's fit for year-round habitation as determined by the commissioner, that was the language the department wanted for this, but that by requiring a dwelling to be fit for year-round habitation. This is like a legal way of, you can slice things up different way. When it comes to the mobile homes, we're just saying those are never going to be considered second homes. When it comes to seasonal, we're saying we're not going to count those as dwellings. And since dwelling is part of what makes something a second home or a short-term rental, effectively the same thing, leaves them out of that different type of taxation, but for slightly different reasons.
Great.
So there it is. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to where we were with another use of a property that's suggested from the department in their report for something to be left out of the second homes and short-term rentals classification is an instance where basically you've got a duplex and one side of the duplex is a homestead and the other side of it is residential, but it would meet the definition of dwelling that we're talking about. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? What this says is if that other side of the duplex is used by the homestead owner for their own purposes, then we're not going to call that a second home. If we don't address that, then you could end up in a situation where just by law, a situation like that would be taxed more. And even though the use of it by the person is to basically treat both units as their one singular home.
So if the other side of the duplex for like an in-law or their kid or something like that, but don't charge them rent.
So if you use it for if it's not used exclusively by the owner for domestic purposes, then you start to look at the other definitions and where they fall into. If it's used by a family member,
That domestic purposes.
yeah, that would maybe still fall under homestead. So that's, but if it's used for a business purpose, let's say it's a therapist and they use that other side as their office and their business. That's going to end up falling under non-homestead, non-residential. And that would be a mixed use. And we'll be talking about how this language addresses mixed use. Doesn't it feel good after all the testimony you've had about all the problems that we're walking through and solving problems potentially?
I feel really good.
That's a nice part of what we're doing right now.
What's exciting is we didn't actually even have to solve the problems ourselves, like tax solved these problems for us. We're just seeing it as solved problems instead of as a report.
It's true. They've done a wonderful job of thinking of a great many things for us to get out ahead of. It's true. Okay, so that's the definition for non-homestead residential. And now I'll hop back up and look at dwelling. As you saw, part of the non-homestead residential definition involved a property that has a dwelling. So if it doesn't have a dwelling, it's not going to ever be classified as that. It would, and if it's not a homestead, that would mean all the properties without dwellings are going to be treated as non-homestead, non-residential. What we're currently calling non-residential. Like commercial properties, in other words. Okay, so the definition of dwelling that we have that's suggested from the department says a dwelling means a building or part of a building, including a single-family home, a unit with a multifamily building, within a multifamily building, an apartment, a condominium, a mobile home. So a mobile home could be a dwelling, but then we eliminate it down below. We can change that. We can change that. Yeah. Or other similar property or structure containing a separate means of ingress and egress that is designed or intended to be used for occupancy by one or more persons in a household, including providing living facilities for sleeping, cooking, and sanitary needs, and is fit for year-round habitation. So the last part goes to seasonal. The first part of that goes to, is it used for a person to live in? So that's the suggested definition of dwelling, which again would be mostly applied in the context of when a property is not a homestead or declared as a homestead, and figuring out whether it's a non-homestead residential property.
Did you look at, of the other states that have classifications, did you look at what any of those states used for this definition?
I've looked at other states. The department looked at other states in the process of putting together the report. I think,
You've spent a lot of time looking at other states, like let us.
yes, and it's just that it's just so different,
Yeah,
is what I would
yeah.
say. It's just so different that adopting what we have or adapting what we have rather, to make this work is the best avenue. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet with other states. Hawaii does a lot of theirs through zoning. That's just not the case for us. Montana already has the state assessing everything. That's not our situation. So yeah. So moving on, the definition for homestead from the Act 73 version, we just added a reference to the existing definition of homestead to make very clear that we're not changing what that means at all through the classifications. Homestead means homestead as it always has. On the top of page 4, we have a definition for long-term rental. Versions of this that were considered last year made references to the landlord certificate to try to get at long-term rentals. You've heard a lot of testimony from the department where they'd rather not do that. They'd rather approach long-term rentals from a different way. So that's what this is. So none of this is relying on landlord certificates in law here. So long-term rental means a dwelling, we just looked at that definition, for which rent is paid for the right of occupancy for periods of at least 30 days. That's the first part. If you're trying to decide whether something's a long-term rental, first question, there's a dwelling here, rent's paid for the right of occupancy, and is that rental period for 30 days at a time? Because if it's a rental period for a week at a time, that's not going to count under this definition. It has to be 30 days at a time. Second question, with combined rental periods in a current calendar year that total at least 6 calendar months. So 30-day rental periods for the current year totaling at least 6 months of those 30-day rental periods. Third question, there's a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship between the parties. This is not a situation where a parent is letting their kids stay there and calling it a long-term rental or something like that, right? Or a situation where someone sets up a LLC to rent it to themselves. Like this language is intended to see through those kinds of things.
And in thinking about not the department's decision to not use the landlord certificate, I've been sort of thinking about what is helpful to use as like explicit verification and data matching for the purposes of implementing this versus all the ways that the tax department uses other data available to them for the purposes of making sure that folks are following the law when they do sort of like pre-audit work. And I'm looking forward to sort of exploring the difference between those two things with the department. So just because they have data available that they're not using explicitly here doesn't mean they wouldn't use it implicitly somewhere else. And that's something I want to understand with them a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah, Representative.
What if the landlord does not call it a lease and calls it a boarding agreement? There's a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship, both kind of a landlord-tenant relationship, but the landlord or the person who's allowing the boarding says, I can come in and live with you in this unit if I need to.
Oh.
Like a roommate situation?
That sounds like you are getting into something that would not be a landlord-tenant relationship because like the right of occupancy is a legal term. I mean, if you don't actually have a full legal right, that if it's not really your space, that would raise some questions. There's a lot of questions where you start to get into landlord-tenant law, which is what some of this does touch on. generally, if you don't have to have a written agreement necessarily. But you do need some kind of rental agreement, under this language and under landlord tenant law. So our language here is a dwelling for which rent is paid for the right of occupancy. And there's a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship. So you could have a written or an oral agreement. And you would at least need the right of occupancy as in having some rights over use of the property. If either of those two things are missing, then you are starting to get towards an ambiguous area where maybe there's not a landlord-tenant relationship.
That, I think that answers my.
Yeah. Representative.
We have got another question on the long-term rental. I know some have mentioned, and here it says also means a dwelling used to house farm workers. There's been some talk about, let's say, a condominium that houses resort workers. How is that?
That's a policy question I wanted to flag for you. So that's moving on to the next part of the language, which is long-term rental also means a dwelling used to house farm workers for at least 6 calendar months, which need not be consecutive in the current calendar year. The question was raised by the department, what to do about farm workers. A related question is, well, what to do about any employee housing, which is what you were getting at.
Right.
And so we have some placeholder language here that that addresses the farm worker question, which is to say those will count as long-term rentals. So in other words, as long as you're following the similar kind of requirements as long-term rentals, as in having them there for 6 calendar months, just like you would, just for a long-term rental, you need a renter for 6 months. So that's this placeholder language is there to address it that way. That could be changed to, instead of farm workers, it could be expanded to employees. That's one question. Another question is, Vermont law does not have a definition of farm workers, even though it uses the term farm workers. So I just want to flag that. I did not try to define it here. Spoke with some of my colleagues. Everyone's like, I don't know.
I bet they all used a lot more words.
I could write a definition, something like a farm worker means an employee of a farm operation. That's not really, we could do something like that. So those are the kinds of policy decisions. And a lot of what I'm saying right now, you're going to want to hear from the department later about their thoughts on what they're comfortable with as far as terminology.
It's a useful flag, though. I mean, farm worker and resort worker are like functionally in the same landlord-tenant type relationship with their employer functionally. And that's something that we can work out as we go.
And,
You don't have to like define farm worker or resort worker if we can sort of get at the relationship with the employer, right?
and some traveling nurses as well.
Yes, yep,
right.
yep.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And then if we want to change this to employee, there'll just be some questions about, employee in what sense? Like how far do we get into like
Yeah.
Department of Labor? They have to, you get it.
Run into an overlap with current use with buildings that house farm workers, that exempt from property taxes.
Mhm. And in that case, farm worker's not defined.
Fine either.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes staff, new staff of any level, is provided temporary or even long-term housing. So do you have to think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the policy question for you here is, there's many policy questions.
Yeah, I get it.
And what treatment do you want those things to have? But this is the language framework that we would use to either to flesh this out more or remove it or do whatever you want. Another policy question here is under non-homestead, non-residential. The department has suggested adding to the definition of, this would be non-homestead, non-residential means the commercial properties. What, a lot of what you think of when people, when taxpayers pay the non-homestead rate right now. Adding to the definition and the classifications that non-homestead, non-residential includes a multifamily building with 5 or more units. They could, I want to give you some explanation just so you know, but I think the department could give you more of their policy argument for wanting this. Currently, when it comes to in the property valuation world, there is a distinction often made between a building that has 4 or fewer units and a building that has 5 or more units. 5 or more units tend in property valuation to be treated as a commercial apartment, where the former tends to be more like treated residential or often does in different contexts. The department's interested in having that treatment baked into this. And it would make some of the administration easier because if you have that many units, there would be less data collection because those could be automatically put into a category. The flip side, though, is it's absolutely possible to have a 5-unit building that's all short-term rental. And if you do this, then you are potentially giving better tax treatment to a building with 5 short-term rentals than you are a building that has 1 short-term rental. That's the policy question.
Green flag.
Which I will just say, like, it's not even completely theoretical. When we have a mixed use building in downtown Bay Area that's commercial on the first floor, then I think there's 7 or 8 Airbnb.
This is another question in regards to this classification. I believe the report from the tax department suggested changing that non-homestead, non-residential to non-homestead commercial.
They did mention that. I didn't touch that one here because it was like a semantics thing. Absolutely something you could do. I guess my thoughts on that are, is a large apartment building residential or commercial? Both. So not entirely accurate no matter what you call it.
Because non-homestead, non-residential still implies that a big apartment building isn't residential. So either way, it's sort of a strange way to title an apartment building.
So but those terms are absolutely can be changed. There's not a legal reason to have a certain thing.
But I think we had some conversation last year about how the terms might not work very perfectly. And we didn't want to get into one of those committee naming activities because we did more than enough of that last year.
It was fun.
It was fun. It was fun. We just can't do it every day, Is everyone in agreement that our legislative intent on this was to not include short-term rentals?
Yes.
In the non-homestead, non-residential.
Is to not give favorable tax treatment to short-term rentals, to not do that.
Yes.
Do we want to take any testimony on that?
Well, I'm curious about like people's intent last year. We can take testimony on what to do or what not to do, but I see mostly agreement and some people feeling uncomfortable about making a decision right now. I was just trying to get a gist. We're not voting. Okay, thank you.
Well, if
Yeah.
we want to go further with that,
Yeah.
I certainly have had a lot of correspondence with people that have a short-term rental on their property. They rely on it for the ability to pay their taxes.
Absolutely.
So in that regard, I would think otherwise, that it wouldn't, overall, I have a concern with this whole category.
There's a footnote from the department's report.
Sorry, I just want to say, I appreciate that even though you have had huge concerns with all of this from the very beginning and you voiced them, you've also constructively helped make it a stronger bill throughout the process. I just want to name that. Thank you for that.
There's a footnote in the department's report when discussing this topic that says, according to VHFA, in 2025, only 1,900 out of Vermont's 12,000 short-term rentals are apartments. I found that bit of information interesting.
See that.
It says, according to VHFA, in 2025, I'll take word only out, 19,000 or 1,900, I'm sorry, 1,900 out of Vermont's 12,000 short-term rentals are apartments.
And the rest would be single family or less than 4 units.
I think that it's implying, yeah, that it's what we're talking about, that's in a building with 4 or fewer units.
Stowe and their condominium dispute.
But if you want to read more about the department's argument on this, you can look at the report, page 13 is where they make their case. Okay, so those are the definitions, as you can see. I'm not sure if I remember to flag every policy question that was on my mind, but hopefully I did. And gonna move on to the mixed use, unless you have questions on.
I just have a question. I don't know which category, but this particular place, it's a camp. It's also a dwelling. It has, a living room, dining room, sleeping area, sanitary rooms as well. It's only used 3 or 4 times. They're only used 3, 4, maybe 5 months of the year. Whether it be in the summer or maybe just, so is that non-homestead, non-residential?
It comes down to whether it's possible to live there year round, whether it's fit, if it's fit for habitation year round, if it's, weatherized and all that, then, and this is not a homestead you're talking about.
It perhaps was a homestead at one time.
But it's not being declared as a homestead in the current year.
Not now.
It would be taxed as the non-homestead residential, as a second home. Yeah.
This may be a weird, meaty question, but I'm curious about how this would work for homes that were in transition. So say you're someone who is out there buying a house, trying to fix it up so that it will be a long-term rental. How does that work during the year that it's maybe under renovation or, you buy it at a certain point in the year? And so during that tax year, it's not rented for 6 months, but it's meant to be a long-term rental at some point.
We don't have anything specifically addressing that in the language now. So with the language that you're looking at in that situation, it would likely fall, like in a lot of cases, if I'm understanding the question, it would fall under non-homestead residential during that time period, only that 1 year. It would get taxed under that classification, assuming it has a dwelling, not declared as a homestead, it's not being rented out because it's being renovated. We're not talking about a mobile home in this case. And we're also not talking about a situation where a homestead person's using it as part of their home, right? So it would end up being non-homestead residential for that year.
And then it would switch once it was rented out.
And then in the next year, if it's rented out for 6 months out of the calendar year, I think it's calendar year.
I think this is a super good example of like a problem under current law that might or might not get exacerbated by this, right? So like, when I bought my house, it was in an estate because the owner had passed away. And so it wasn't declared as a homestead. And so during the transition time, it caused us all kinds of tax confusion.
Is this, Kirby, where that attestation would come into play as well?
We'll get into that because there's some policy questions around that. But that is part of what we're going to discuss.
I mean, if they don't attest when they buy it, then, the listers or whoever would have
It
to.
would be a yearly attestation, and in this case, That goes to, yeah, we should get into it separately. It's its own thing.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna say that, because it's a whole different conversation. Is it okay if I move on to mixed use?
Think so? Yes?
Okay. So subsection D was the part of this section from the Act 73 language that dealt with mixed use. This has been fleshed out more here to address more of the questions that have come up. So the language here says a parcel with two or more portions qualifying as different classifications shall be classified proportionally as follows. Number one, buildings shall be classified proportionally based on the percentage of floor space used. This is similar to current law when you have a homestead that also has part of it being used for a business purpose, right? It gets taxed proportionally based on the percentage that's being used as a business purpose. That doesn't get the homestead treatment. The rest of it does, right? So similar concept. In the case of a homestead, though, to give you some background info, which is very relevant here, if any part of the parcel is part of a homestead, all the land gets treated as a homestead under current law. So the only part that gets a different tax treatment is the portion of the floor space of the building that's used for the business purpose. We're retaining, in the language that you're about to look at, we are retaining the homestead treatment. Everywhere that current law touches on homesteads, it's retaining that same practice. So when it comes to a homestead, same treatment with the proportionality for mixed use, same treatment for the land surrounding. So some of this other stuff we're about to look at, I want you to keep in mind, only deals with the new situation in which you could have a non-homestead residential and a non-homestead non-residential mixed use in the same parcel. Because with homestead, we've already got that covered. So you start by looking at buildings and you look at the floor space used. And then to deal with underlying land, the way that this is written, there's different ways to skin this cat. Is that a great expression?
Southern really came out for a second.
What's that?
You're like Southern twang came out for a second.
Oh, really? Oh. I mean, anyway. The way this is written is you'll take the building proportionality and you'll just apply it to the land. So if it's 60% second home, 40% commercial property, then the land would also be classified 60%, 40% and that with that same proportion. That's the way this is written. It could be, other things. But this is a solution to that problem.
So that floor space is going to be now a percentage of the whole parcel.
Like the 60-40 example I was just using, yeah, it would be the whole 60-40 of the whole parcel, but you're basing it off of floor space of the building being used.
Yeah,
So I think it's the opposite.
it's the opposite, I'm hoping. So the floor space is all we're doing, even though it's going to be part of the whole parcel, it's still only that 100 square feet.
No.
Underneath that floor space.
Let's say you've got 1,000 square feet and you've got an acre of land around it. You look at the square footage, say it's 600 square feet, second home, 400 square feet of commercial use. So that building, the value of the building is going to be proportional in tax, 60% second home rate, 40% non-homestead, non-residential rate. And then for the land value, 60% of that will be taxed at the second home rate, 40% of that land value taxed at
60%.
40% of it will be taxed as the non-homestead,
I feel
non-residential.
like we need a diagram. You just drew a diagram.
Well,
I mean, the easy way to say it is you take the proportionality of the building and you apply it to the land, which, I'm sure you could point out some cons with that, as in
10 acres and the 40%, you could assume the commercial is, you could use as swampland rather than the good acreage around the house. I mean, that's what I would look at as a
Oh, that's-
problem. As a lister, what am I gonna do? He's gonna say, you know, at 40% of it's commercial.
Mhm.
If you're gonna assess the land, should be assessed on the swamp that's out back.
The value, this won't affect. As far as deciding the value, won't affect. We're just talking about the tax rate that's applied. Talking about the tax part of it. Because remember, with the classifications, this whole process we're going through is just deciding which tax rate's gonna get applied. Is it gonna be presumably the higher second home rate to the value? So when we talk about proportionality, we take, the value's not gonna change. The value of the whole parcel is the value of the whole parcel. Take the building value, 60-40, and then take the land value, 60-40. As far as 60% of it will get the higher rate, 40% of that value will get the lower rate.
But the business is not 40% of the whole parcel. It's not taking up that much.
It's not using the land at all, right? So there'll be arguments and,
I think we need to find our way through this.
Yeah.
and I think this is a classic, like, there's ways to make it administratively easier. But then the downside could be, you can come up with situations that aren't equitable. And you get that tension all the time in tax law. It's all over the place, right? And then the more complex it gets to try to be equitable can sometimes create inequities just doing that. Because taxpayers no longer know what they're supposed to do and so yeah, it is one of those situations. For alternatives, just to give you a comparison, because I was trying to think about other ways to possibly do this. Again, there's only two classifications this would apply to, because if it's homestead, we already have the answer. The land's going to be taxed as homestead. So it's only when there's not a homestead. So it's the other two classifications of the mixed use is what we're talking about. You could say it's always 50-50 when it comes to land. You could look at the building proportionality and then we could write in that the land is always 50-50. Or you could say, well, if any part of it's a second home, let's tax all the land as a second home. That's another way you could go about it. There are different ways. That's why, these are policy choices. I think the important thing is to answer the questions so that people know what the law is.
If it's a business, not a second home, a portion of the building, it's not a business.
If it's 100% business,
Yeah.
then the land is 100% business. And it's in the,
Wait a minute.
yeah,
Somebody lives in the house and they're using one room as a business.
okay.
A 25% tax.
Is it their homestead?
Yeah.
It's their homestead? Then that's like the current, that we apply current law, which is that only the business use is taxed like the business, and the land and the rest of the dwelling taxed as a homestead.
So homestead sort of prevails over any other thing.
Homestead, yes, it's good to have a homestead as far as the tax treatment, that's for sure.
He's talking about if you rented the rest of the building out.
But in your example, what we're talking about here applies if instead of a homestead, that's a unit that's a second home. It's in a unit that is not someone's homestead. And then you could have a situation in a large apartment building that's, some of them are short-term rentals, some of them are long-term rentals, and then you start to have that mixed use of some of it's non-homestead residential, some of it's non-homestead non-residential. And then you would take the proportionality of the building and apply that to the land to decide what tax rate applies to the value of the land.
Yes, and I think like the further conversation of this section will be best served with the whiteboard
Okay.
or like a flow chart or something. I don't know. Yeah, or Carol.
No, I understand
Yeah.
what
okay,
he's
cool.
saying. I'm just
Great.
saying, I can think of at least 3 examples maybe not in my district, but at least adjacent. One is in my district, but 2 others are at least adjacent, where the land is all used for business purpose, essentially. It's like hobby farms, basically, that are, producing stuff that goes into products that they're selling in a little shop. And then they also have short-term rental or two that they use as another part of, how they're making money. And so you're saying under this treatment, if if half of the building is short-term rental, then half of the land would also be considered second home tax rate.
Yeah.
And so if we don't think that works, let's think of something that works. And so what I'm gonna I don't know if we're gonna get through all of this today, but I hope we will. I don't really have a sense of how far you are. But next time we do a go round on this, if folks want to give some thought to the sections, come with new ideas for sections, I guess is what my sentence is. Yeah.
Before we move on from the mixed use question, I mean, I do want to flag that to consider that if you this is a shortcut for looking at the actual use. We would know the building proportionality because the owner would declare that under this scheme. The use of land starts to become a lot more ambiguous and a lot harder to administer. That's why this placeholder is trying to find a shortcut. Actual use of land is a lot harder to suss out than the actual use of the building, right? Okay.
Agreed.
So the third part we have here is notwithstanding any provision of this subsection to the contrary, the entire parcel, this is the number 3 here is, we're saying homestead wins. Like we've been saying, right? Number 4 here is from the Act 73 language, and it's applying the current law treatment to when a homestead has a business use. And number 5 is also from Act 73, but this is the part of the mixed use question that gets at what do you do when some of the floor space is used for multiple purposes. And this provision just states that whichever use is the most often is going to be the primary use. And that's what you put that down as. So if you have a second home with a room that you use as an office, but you also do recreational things in there, whichever one you use it the most often for is what you should put down as the use of it. So that's that question. And that's what we have for mixed use here. This is our attempt at trying to get all the things that the department flagged for mixed use issues.
And again, this is gonna be one of the harder parts of what we do, and it's hard under current law, and we have something under current law for this. So I just I don't want us to get sort of perfect enemy of the good kind of situation, because we already have that problem under current law. Yeah.
Our purpose in creating these additional categories is to raise more money or to be more accurate in our taxing?
I think it's more accurate in our taxing. It's to be able to, if in the future we want to use taxation for policy change. I think the big push last session was to tax second homes or non-primary homes at a higher rate in order to lower property taxes for other properties. Does that represent other people's, I don't want to speak for everyone.
Now, except for
Yes.
88 towns.
What?
We're kind of doing that now for second homes. They have the non-residential rate, which is generally higher, except that in 88 towns right now, the residential rate is higher.
88 towns is a lot of towns.
And it's also, for the non-homestead rate being higher in some towns, that also taxes for small businesses more than, and so also, and that's one big thing in Berry City is folks have said we want to tax the second homeowners. If we start to go down that path under current law, I'm also raising the property taxes of the hardware store companies, right? So I think that's another, being able to separate those two communities of taxpayers.
But we're raising taxes on people that have a second home that are not there all the time.
Mhm.
that are, don't have children in the school system. It doesn't seem fair.
I appreciate that. We are tasked with continuing to implement Act 73 here. And that's, but I totally appreciate that is definitely a difference of opinion at the table. Okay, okay.
So the things that we covered in the language we've looked at so far, I think cover everything that was in step one, which is what the department has said in their report is what the legislature should figure out now so that other things can be done building off of that. So from here, I'm going to go to step two, which relates to data collection that's needed, information gathering that's needed to start to implement this in 2028 under the Act 73 timeline. So we have language here that's from Act 73 that's about the transition. I've highlighted this just to ask the question, this says for calendar year 2027, the commissioner shall amend and create forms so that the taxpayers report information on the use of their property for such property to be classified as these different classifications. Is this still the desired approach? It's kind of the question. I mean, I think it is, but I just, because that relates to the next part, which is there's a policy question here for the department's step two, which is how do you go about a property owner attestation? How do you go about gathering information from property owners about how they are using their property in the current year? And then there's a side question to that. How do we go about knowing what properties have dwellings and what don't? So those are kind of two things, and reading the department's report, it's clear that they're envisioning an attestation from property owners where they're gathering information, and it's clear that they're also going to be relying on listers and assessors to gather some information on the ground, which informs this. I think part of the questions for you are going to be, what do you want to put into the law specifically to help facilitate this? Based on the report, I think the department wants the homestead declaration to have an added part to it that is as Jake has called the DUA, the dwelling unit attestation. And I think that that's the idea. But I haven't drafted anything about that because that's a policy question for you. How do you want to go about the property owner attestation part? Second question is,
I just want to sort of pause on that. So the way I think about that is right now, only homestead property taxpayers file a declaration. And not all do even. Partly because of some of the reasons that were just laid out. And so do all property taxpayers now file an attestation in this scenario? Do some of the categories file and some don't? Sorry, back to you.
right. A lot of this is about identifying dwelling units, because if you don't have a dwelling unit, then the tax classification's straightforward. That means it's non-homestead, non-residential. But because non-homestead residential is presumably going to be the classification with the highest tax rate, if people won't report the use of their property, should the default be the higher rate, which is the default be to assume there's a dwelling unit? There's questions like that there. But the other part of it, which the department's report was, they clearly were expecting some on the ground data collection to also supplement this information. And with this, I'm going to scroll up to the top. If you remember, I skipped the first section. So we're going to finally get back up to that, which is one thing that I drafted about their step two, which is to potentially add to the grand list contents a separate column listing the number of dwellings as defined by the commissioner. So this would be putting it on assessing officials to put on the grand list, number of dwelling units for each property. So this would be how you answer that question. How do we know what properties have dwelling units and how many do they have? This is one way to go about that, and it's putting it on assessing officials to do that.
I listen to this and I think that's a lot of burden on the assessing officials, and then I think about registration of apartments and dwelling units, and I think that would possibly, would that be in here, something?
I think those are all the questions.
Too, yeah.
Yeah, how do they know what they've got, if they, the dwelling unit? I'm thinking of I shouldn't raise my hand, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of a lady in my district who has 3 daughters. One of the daughters loves horses, has one. When the husband made some improvements to the barn, he built a little kitchenette for her out there. And the bathroom, it has running water and a walk-in shower, not a tub. Sometimes, well, more than half the summer, her mother says, the girl sleeps out there with her horse. So is that a dwelling unit?
Like with the hay, in the hay?
She has a, you know,
There's
those folding cots like you see at the fair, the kids bring to you with their cows.
That's very sweet.
It's very, yeah,
Very
that's
fun.
it out there.
She might be my favorite anecdote of the year. I think it could last a month.
How else do you know what about her, you know, form? Is that?
She stated.
Well, let's not.
Yeah, you need to do a constituent visit, get some more information.
You're out. But I mean, so what would that be called? Is that a dwelling unit? But they're,
We can apply the language to this situation. The question when it comes to a dwelling unit though is it designed or for one thing is, okay, is there one ingress and one egress? There's an entrance and an exit to the barn?
many, yeah,
Okay, that's one question.
at least 4.
Next question is it designed or intended to be used for occupancy,
It's a.
including providing living facilities for sleeping, cooking, and sanitary needs?
Eating.
The lack of kitchen and bathroom might
It's
not.
a kitchen and bathroom.
There's no sleeping.
There's a sink in there, a little refrigerator, like in a college dorm, heating pads, where so she can heat up spaghettios and stuff like that. The kid lives there.
Finished floor?
I wouldn't call it a finished floor. It's a cement floor with an
Well,
area.
and so there is the intended to be used for occupancy, and I think that it's meant occupancy as humans, not occupancy. Yes. But I think, we're gonna be testing each of these definitions against some experiences we've had. We'll be testing them against current law and how those things are resolved in current law. So right now, we rely on self-attestation for lots of things, right? Including our income taxes to some degree. And that works or doesn't, as the case may be.
This will be fun.
What?
This will be.
I think so too. I really like today. Yes.
So some of the policy questions around the data collection are, do you add it to as part of the grand list, like the language I showed? Is it going to be part of regular grand list maintenance to keep up on the number of dwelling units in the municipality? It seems like that's going to be a necessary part. It's hard to avoid that, to be honest. So then the next part is, do you directly pay municipalities to classify these ahead? And one question is, as the department suggests, or envisions at least partly in its report, is that this upcoming summer, there would be some concerted effort by listers and assessors to go out and get information And there's suggestions that the state pay them for that effort that's outside of their usual course of work. Or do you want to take the approach of, we're just going to make this going forward part of their usual course of work? Second question, aside from a direct, appropriation to pay for this work, if that's the way you want to go about it. Second question is, do you indirectly pay municipalities through allowing this classification system to be used for municipal taxes? Because under the language we have now, this is written for state education tax. The question of whether a municipality gets to decide whether they want to tax second homes at a higher rate has not been answered.
What happens now?
With the language we have now, under Act 73, for municipal taxes, it would still be homestead, non-homestead.
What do municipalities do now?
Huh?
What do municipalities do right now? Do they charge non-homestead tax?
Under current law, they set their municipal tax rate and it applies to, yeah.
I think that's not a homestead.
Huh?
I think that's not a homestead. Gets that other right.
Representative Wozniak?
And-
What were you saying?
We couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry, well, it's
Yeah.
just, anything that's not a homestead gets charged for non-homestead. Right,
Right. Yes,
yeah,
correct.
yes, I think.
So-
Their municipal tax as well as.
Let's let Kurt talk, everyone. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you set your municipal rate and it applies to the properties in the municipality. And then, what distinction are you making?
I guess I don't know, I don't wanna go.
I also, we heard testimony this morning when we were talking about the RADs, right? About how municipalities are compensated for this work and how maybe we need to be looking at how we should be compensating them differently for this work as that work has evolved. And we sort of punted that conversation last year because it,
Again, the tax department suggested that local municipalities could piggyback off the new classification for local roads or retain more of the ed tax, which is 0.225%. There's two options.
But, the point when it comes to municipal taxes is, under current law, there's no way for a municipality to tax second homes. It differently, and then under the language we have from Act 73 so far, it was drafted in a way in which that's not an option either, because we set the factors to apply to the state education tax only under Act 73. There's no factors to apply for municipal property taxes.
and if folks want to do some ground truthing and find out if this is something municipalities would want, please do so and report back. Where are you, Kirby?
Mhm.
You're on page 707.
Yeah, I think we're done, unless there's more questions. Again, I'll just reiterate, we're down at the effective dates here. There's nothing there right now, but the idea is this is going to be repeal and replace using the same effective dates as Act 73. And at this point, not assuming that you want to add the same contingencies that exist in Act 73. So those might get lost unless you ask me to put them back in, such as just the contingency that classifications will not happen unless you set up school districts by a certain date.
So for next steps on this, folks, for the pieces that are sort of outstanding, if folks could do their best thinking about, like, if there are smaller pieces that folks have ideas for changes, if there are bigger pieces that were flagged as problems that folks have ideas for improvements, let's bring them to the table For the pieces that were a little more confusing, I think we could do like we can do a diagram or a flow chart or something together next time we're together. And think about, who we would want to hear from in terms of testimony. Vala, definitely, probably the league, definitely. Tax, of course, though Kirby worked with them on this language. So if you have other folks who you think would be helpful on that. on the-
Realtors?
Realtors, thank you. Right. Yeah, we're done until tomorrow. And tomorrow, gosh, I have no idea what happens. Tomorrow, like I've said 20 times already today, we're taking testimony in the estate tax, and I did not retain that information. So we're gonna do that with Pat in the morning. And then, the downtown and village center tax credit, we're hearing testimony about that. Folks who have been on the committee, maybe even last year, we took testimony on it. It's just an annual part of our work. And then we're gonna take testimony on counting students, particularly from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, because that's come up a few times. And we want to make sure we're all on the same page with the Agency of Education on that. And then, in the afternoon, we're gonna look at, developing guidance for reserve funds for school districts. With a bunch of fun with it. And that's it.